The scent of salt-laced air and expensive champagne, usually intoxicating, had begun to smell like stale performance. Ethan Miller stood alone on the cedar deck of his Hamptons retreat, watching the rising sun paint the Atlantic in a ruthless gold. It had been exactly 7 days since his daughter, Olivia, married Adam Thorne in a lavish ceremony that dominated the social pages of the New York Times. The headline had called it, "The Wedding of the Season, Just for Special People." Ethan had paid for every velvet curtain, every imported peony, every strange smile, believing he was purchasing his daughter's happiness. Now, all he felt was an unnerving, profound emptiness. Ethan, a man whose life was built on the clean, immutable lines of glass and steel, the foundation of a successful Manhattan architectural firm, hated ambiguity. Yet, the past week was an exercise in it. Adam, the perfectly chiseled son-in-law, had flown back to San Francisco 2 days after the ceremony, citing an urgent tech crisis, leaving Olivia strangely unaffected and dismissive. The newlywed phase, which Ethan had observed through the tinted lens of decades of marriage, was absent. There were no lingering phone calls, no late-night texts, no eager talk of the canceled European honeymoon. He walked back into the silent, cavernous living room. The wedding gifts, crates of sterling silver, Murano glass, and obscure antique furniture, remained stocked in the corner, still bearing the pristine courier tags. They looked less like symbols of commitment and more like props after the curtain had fallen. He picked up his work phone, a sleek device that felt too heavy in his hand. Ethan was meant to be working on the new Tribeca skyscraper deal, a project that required absolute focus, but his mind kept looping back to the single, chilling piece of digital debris he had received yesterday. It was an anonymous email, no subject line, no sender identification, just an attached screenshot. The image displayed a forum thread from Reddit, a site he barely understood, labeled with a username, Broken Vows NYC, and a title that made the blood beneath his scalp prickle. They thought the fake Hampton spectacle was just for special people. The screenshot was brief, vague, but utterly precise in its poison. The post detailed an elaborate wedding scam, claiming the entire event was staged to fulfill a bizarre clause in a trust fund or corporate merger agreement, allowing the bride to gain access to millions. The comment section was a cesspool of cynicism and armchair psychology, yet one line, deep in the thread, pulled Ethan's breath away. "I know the father. He's the real victim. He paid for the whole damn lie."
He dismissed it as trolling, a jealous outsider's attempt to stir chaos. Yet the precision of the phrase, "just for special people," a subtle nod to the society columnist's flattering piece, felt too close to be random. Later that afternoon, back in his sterile, art-filled Manhattan apartment, he called Mark Sullivan. Mark was more than just a partner in the firm. He was a friend of 30 years, a man who had stood beside Ethan at his own wedding and the godfather to Olivia. Mark had also volunteered to manage the complex multi-vendor finances of the wedding, offering to take the headache off you, old man. "Mark, about the final ledger for Olivia's fete," Ethan began, his voice flat, professional. "There's an unusually large, round figure, a wire transfer to Solstice Consulting that I don't recall approving. It's listed simply as private arrangement." A beat of hesitation stretched across the fiber optic line. "Ah, Ethan, that was a private arrangement for Adam's family. Something about a European vendor's contract that had to be handled discreetly, cash up front, no paper trail. You know, these old money people, they insisted on anonymity." Mark's voice was too smooth, too rehearsed. "It's all squared away now, nothing to worry about. Just a very, very special vendor." The word special was the needle. The anonymous email, the Reddit thread, the word in the newspaper, and now Mark's overly casual explanation. The pieces didn't fit the rational architectural blueprint of his life. He thanked him, hung up, and walked over to the glass wall overlooking Central Park. Below him, the city glittered, a beautiful, sprawling testament to engineered complexity. But sometimes, he knew, the most elegant structures concealed the most lethal flaws. He realized he wasn't looking at a misunderstanding, he was looking at the precipice of a slow-burn disaster, one he hadn't designed and certainly couldn't control. He had to find the source of the betrayal, and the digital echo chamber seemed to be the only place left to look. The glass wall in Ethan's study was no longer a window onto the city. It was a mirror reflecting the solitary, haunted look of a man unraveling a blueprint for disaster. The glow of his computer screen was the only source of light, casting his 50-year-old face in harsh shadows. Ethan was an architect, accustomed to the clarity of steel beams and load-bearing walls. The digital landscape of Reddit, however, was a maze of anonymous whispers and shifting sand. Yet he navigated it with the fierce, focused precision he once reserved for drafting seismic-resistant foundations. He quickly located the user Broken Vows NYC. The account was not a flash-in-the-pan troll. It was a meticulous, slow-burn documentarian of a family's descent. The posts, spanning 6 months, were a cruel reverse chronology of the Miller family's life, veiled thinly enough to be deniable, but specific enough to be chilling. The first post, dated 3 months before the wedding, was a prelude titled, "The Price of Perfect Facades." It spoke of a young woman burdened by unbearable tech debt and a father who believed money could insulate his child from all consequence. The words were laced with intimate contempt, a knowledge that dug deeper than mere gossip. Ethan's chest tightened, a physical constriction that felt like a sudden drop in altitude. Olivia had briefly mentioned a small setback with a startup, a typical young professional's misstep, nothing alarming. But this spoke of millions. He remembered Mark, his friend, cautioning him against being too generous with Olivia's starter money. Could Mark have known the full extent? He scrolled down to a post made the day after the ceremony, titled, "The Great Wedding Heist, Act 1 Complete." This was where the vague fear solidified into cold horror. The author detailed the precise mechanics of the staged event, the specific financial instrument that was unlocked by the appearance of marriage, the paid agreement with the groom. Adam was not just a paid accomplice, but an actor with a significant stake, and the complex accounting maneuvers used to bury the transaction within the legitimate wedding expenditures. The old man is so blind, so proud of his special people guest list, he won't see the wire transfers disguised as floral deposits and vintage wine expenses, the post read. The language was not just analytical, it was the voice of a bitter insider, someone familiar with Ethan's financial habits and Mark's accounting tactics. It spoke of vendor names Mark had specifically mentioned, Vanderbilt Event Services, which Mark had insisted was a necessary front for their discrete payments, and even the unusual offshore account used for the special arrangement. Ethan's architectural training kicked in. He began to cross-reference details. The exact time the Solstice Consulting transfer was made, the day the wedding commitment was legally executed, and the amount, which he now realized matched the exact size of the debt mentioned in a cryptic footnote of the Reddit thread. It wasn't trolling. It was a ledger written in bile. He leaned back, the leather of his executive chair groaning under the sudden movement. His wife had died 3 years ago, leaving him with an immense fortune and an equally immense vacuum. He had poured all his remaining love and focus into Olivia, believing her happiness was his masterpiece. Now, the image of his daughter, in her custom Vera Wang gown, laughing under the chandeliers he paid for, warped into the face of a meticulous, ice-cold conspirator. But the most disturbing detail was the author's tone towards him. It was not just pity for a victim. It was an undercurrent of spite, a sense of historic entitlement, as if Ethan's downfall was a long-awaited justice. Who among his special people harbored such deep, corrosive resentment? He thought of Mark Sullivan, Mark who has always been the number 2, the shadow partner, immensely competent but perpetually standing slightly to the side of the spotlight that Ethan, the charismatic designer, effortlessly commanded. Mark knew the intricacies of the firm's finances, the structure of the family trusts, and, most damningly, he was the only one besides Ethan who managed the wedding's complex vendor payments. Ethan's mind flashed back to their conversation just hours ago. Mark's too smooth delivery, the casual dismissiveness of the Solstice Consulting wire. It's all squared away now. Nothing to worry about. Just a very, very special vendor. The italicized word in the post, the repeated use of special people and special vendor, was the linguistic fingerprint. Mark had been talking about the specific transaction written about by Broken Vows NYC. The connection was too precise, too personal. Ethan stared at the screen, the cold digital confirmation of a betrayal that transcended a simple lie. It suggested not just deception by his daughter, but a calculated, professional dismantling of his life by his closest friend. It was financial murder dressed in white lace. He closed the browser, the bright screen instantly replaced by the oppressive darkness of the room. Ethan didn't want to confront Mark with a screenshot and a hunch. He wanted to confront him with concrete, irrefutable proof, the kind of evidence that would bring down the most complex structural deception. Tomorrow, he would use his access as managing partner to delve deep into the firm's shared accounts, not for a quick review, but for a demolition. The offices of Miller and Sullivan were a monument to clean minimalism, all brushed steel and reinforced concrete, designed by Ethan himself 20 years prior. He walked in before the city awoke, the quiet echoing unnervingly in the empty halls. The silence usually signified focus and control. Today, it felt like the quiet before an execution. Ethan went directly to the secure server room, a place few partners ever physically visited. He logged into the firm's centralized financial management system, the digital heart that pumped millions of dollars through their complex projects. He wasn't looking for a mistake in accounting. He was looking for a signature of betrayal. He started with the wedding expenditures, cross-referencing Mark's seemingly meticulous ledger with the raw bank statements. Mark had cleverly structured the payments, scattering the massive Solstice Consulting wire transfer across several minor vendor accounts, a classic obfuscation tactic. The sheer size of the payment was the first anomaly, an amount exorbitant even for a Hamptons affair. Nearly $2.5 million, billed as high-end logistics and security. Ethan's fingers tapped against the keyboard, the only sound in the vast building. He remembered standing on the deck in the Hamptons, boasting to a client that his daughter's wedding was a testament to his success, that he spared no expense. He hadn't been buying a wedding, he was funding a cover-up. He shifted his focus from the wedding accounts to the firm's private investments, specifically the small high-risk capital fund that Ethan and Mark jointly managed for the partners' children. This is where he found it, a series of alarming margin calls against Olivia's name dating back 18 months. Her initial investment had been wiped out, followed by a quiet, aggressive escalation of debt. The debts weren't small losses. They were systemic, near-ruinous liabilities, cleverly hidden under complex derivatives-based instruments that only a seasoned financial manipulator could set up or clean up. The total exposure was precisely equivalent to the $2.5 million transferred to Solstice Consulting, which was the entity used to pay off the debt. The wedding wasn't the transaction. It was the mechanism to generate the money to cover the transaction, masking a debt payoff as a luxury expense. He printed a stack of financial statements, the stark white paper carrying the dark weight of undeniable truth. As the printer whirred, Ethan's mind raced. Olivia's gambling wasn't the sole culprit. The sheer complexity of the debt structure pointed to a guiding hand. Someone who knew precisely how to use the family's assets as collateral without triggering any immediate red flags. That hand belonged to Mark Sullivan, the firm's financial partner, the architect of their fiscal stability.
Just as Ethan was collating the final pages, the elevator chimed. Mark walked out, impeccably dressed, coffee in hand, a practiced morning smile on his face. He stopped, seeing Ethan in the normally forbidden server room, a stack of papers in his hand. The smile faltered. "Ethan, what are you doing down here? Everything all right?" Mark's voice was too genial, too concerned. Ethan held up the stack of papers, his hands trembling not from fear, but from a cold, quiet rage. "I'm reconciling the books, Mark.
Specifically, the books that connect a $2.5 million expense listed as high-end logistics to an offshore shell company that bailed out a catastrophic margin call against Olivia's name. Mark's face went rigid. The color drained, leaving the skin around his eyes pale and taut. He set his coffee down on a nearby console table with a soft thud, the sound echoing in the silence. "Ethan, you need to understand. Olivia came to me 6 months ago. She was desperate, terrified. She'd made mistakes, invested poorly. The margin calls were crippling. She begged me not to tell you. I was trying to protect her, protect you from the trauma." "And the wedding?" asked Ethan, his voice low, dangerously controlled. "The fake husband, the whole spectacle. Was that also part of your paternal protection, Mark? Or was that your idea to structure the repayment using my deep pockets as a blind slush fund, knowing I'd never question a bill with my daughter's happiness attached to it?" Mark sighed, running a hand over his face. He maintained the facade of regret, but the defensiveness in his posture was palpable. "The wedding was the only clean way. It was a condition of a specific trust she needed access to. We had to show commitment. It was a maneuver, yes, but for her benefit. I was going to explain everything when the dust settled. I risked my own standing to help your daughter, Ethan. Your only daughter." The invoking of Olivia's vulnerability, the final rhetorical manipulation, was too much. Ethan knew Mark was telling a polished half-truth. He didn't want to hear the rest from Mark. He had to hear it from the source of the debt and the deception, Olivia. "Don't worry about the dust, Mark," he said, his gaze hard, focusing on a spot just past Mark's shoulder. "I'm going to start vacuuming." He turned and walked away, leaving Mark standing alone in the steel and concrete silence, the untouched coffee rapidly cooling beside the evidence of his betrayal.
The Miller penthouse, usually a sanctuary of muted tones and curated art, felt like a cage. Ethan found Olivia in the living room, staring blankly at the cityscape. She was dressed in sweatpants and a cashmere sweater, her post-wedding glow completely extinguished, replaced by a hollow-eyed exhaustion. She was exactly where Ethan had expected her to be, paralyzed by the weight of her deceit. He didn't need to yell. He simply placed the meticulously organized stack of financial documents on the glass coffee table between them, the Solstice Consulting wire transfer, the margin call notices, and the timeline linking Mark's involvement to the staged wedding day. "Don't insult my intelligence, Olivia," Ethan said, his voice flat, devoid of the warmth he had spent a lifetime nurturing for her. "I don't want the version of the story Mark Sullivan gave me. I want the truth, every single ugly detail." Olivia flinched, not at the papers, but at the clinical distance in his voice. She looked at the documents, then back at her father, recognizing the end of her elaborate charade. "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry," she whispered, the words thin and sharp with defeat. The confession spilled out, a toxic flood of shame, fear, and desperation. It had started small, a seemingly brilliant investment tip from an acquaintance in Silicon Valley, that quickly spiraled into a catastrophic loss. The pressure to maintain her image, the successful, stylish daughter of Ethan Miller, prevented her from asking for help. "I kept digging the hole deeper," she admitted, tears finally tracing clean paths down her cheeks. "The last margin call was 5 months ago. The bank was threatening to expose everything, not just my name, but the potential liabilities to the firm. I panicked." Mark Sullivan, the ever-present paternalistic figure, had been the one she ran to. He hadn't scolded her, he had been chillingly practical. He analyzed the debt and offered a solution that sounded like salvation, but was, in fact, a gilded trap. He said the only way to quickly generate that kind of liquidity without alerting the IRS or the SEC was to trigger the family trust clause. It required a bona fide marriage to access a specific portion of the capital that was tied up in an old partnership agreement you had with Mark's uncle years ago. He designed the wedding. He found Adam was a junior associate at a law firm, who was paid $100,000 to sign the papers and disappear after the honeymoon.
Ethan listened, his face granite. The betrayal wasn't just about the money.
It was the ruthless exploitation of his love. They hadn't just used his funds, they had used his pride in her, his deep emotional desire to see her happy, as the ultimate cover. And Mark, what was his price? Ethan asked, leaning forward, focusing his gaze on the central, terrifying fact. Olivia hesitated, unable to meet his eyes. He didn't ask for money. He said he was protecting me, protecting the firm's name. But in return, I was indebted to him. He controlled the repayment schedule, the narrative. He told me exactly what to say, how to act. He said the only way to make sure the debt stayed buried was if I maintained absolute silence and obeyed all his directives. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the realization that Mark's protection was not paternal, but predatory. He had turned a debt crisis into an instrument of absolute control over Ethan's daughter, creating a terrifying dynamic of power and manipulation that was far more damaging than the $2.5 million loss. Ethan finally stood up, his gaze sweeping over the luxury apartment he had bought for Olivia, a space that now felt utterly contaminated. Debt item annulled today. Use whatever Mark set up to reverse the contracts, Ethan commanded, his voice shaking slightly. Then I don't want you to speak to Mark Sullivan again. Not about the debt, not about the firm, not ever. I will handle the consequences of your financial mistakes, but the consequence of your moral betrayal, that is something you will have to live with alone. He turned and walked towards the door. The distance between them was vast and final. Olivia cried out, "Dad, wait, please don't leave me." Ethan paused with his hand on the cold brass knob. He looked back at his daughter, not seeing the helpless young woman, but the willing participant in a grand, calculated deception. You were just for special people, Olivia, and you chose the wrong ones.
Ethan did not go back to the office. He went to the firm's secondary storage unit in an obscure corner of Long Island City, a dusty repository of architectural models, discarded prototypes, and, more importantly, the physical archives spanning 3 decades. He was no longer investigating the money, he was investigating the man. The physical ledger of Miller & Sullivan's founding contained the true history. Ethan pulled out the earliest partnership records, documents predating the digital age, pages bound in worn leather and smelling of old paper and ambition. As he sifted through the yellowed contracts, he wasn't looking for fraud, but for the seed of Mark's decades-long resentment. It was there, tucked inside a 1998 annex to the original partnership deed. A detailed, revolutionary schematic for their first major contract, the transformation of an obsolete shipyard into a luxury waterfront complex, the project that launched the reputation. The design was groundbreaking, and the concept drawings were signed not just by Ethan, but co-signed by Mark. However, the final publicized blueprints, the ones that won Ethan awards and secured his status as a visionary, showed significant, subtle alterations. Mark's original, more controversial structural design had been replaced by a more conservative, aesthetically pleasing one drafted solely by Ethan just weeks before the final pitch. Ethan remembered the friction. Mark had been furious, accusing Ethan of undermining his vision and prioritizing superficial glamour over structural innovation. Ethan had dismissed it then, citing client mandate and creative differences. He had been the senior partner, and he had won. Mark had quietly backed down, retreating into the financial management side of the business, becoming indispensable but forever secondary. As Ethan stared at the 2 competing sets of blueprints, separated by 25 years and 2 vastly different destinies, the reality of Mark's malice clicked into place. The $2.5 million scheme wasn't just about profiting from Olivia's mistake. It was the ultimate, calculated exposure of Ethan's perceived flaws. His vanity, his focus on appearance, and his blind spot for human manipulation. Mark hadn't just arranged the debt payoff, he had arranged Ethan's emotional demolition. Ethan then returned to the Reddit thread, reading the posts again, filtering out the fear and focusing solely on the language. He noticed the use of precise architectural metaphors in Broken Vows NYC's later, more gloating posts. The whole foundation of their family was too poorly structured to withstand the pressure, and the old man built a facade, not a home. This was not a financial predator, this was a disillusioned architect exacting vengeance.
The true, horrifying realization came when Ethan revisited the first anonymous email he received. He hadn't just been sent a screenshot of a public forum. He had been sent the initial prompt that launched the entire thread. A private message sent from Mark's secure work email to a throwaway account, outlining the plan to seed the story onto Reddit, making the betrayal public in the most anonymous yet traceable way possible. Mark hadn't been blackmailed. He was the orchestrator who wanted the truth, his truth, exposed to ruin Ethan. Ethan felt a crushing wave of despair, not just for the money, but for the fundamental lie of his life. Mark had been playing a long game, pretending to be the supportive friend, the reliable partner, while meticulously planning a decades-delayed revenge. The wedding was merely the explosive device used to detonate their shared history. He left the storage unit, driving back toward the city, not to his home, but to the location of their firm's newest project, a half-finished penthouse atop a new building in Tribeca. This was the place where Mark and Ethan had last celebrated, marking the pinnacle of their partnership. This was where the confrontation had to happen. As Ethan drove, he sent a single, untraceable text message to Mark. Tribeca, tonight, the penthouse 9 p.m. Bring the truth, not the ledger. He knew Mark would come. Vengeance needed an audience, and Ethan was the only one who truly understood the depth of Mark's resentment over a 25-year-old architectural drawing. The time of denial and half-truths was over. The unfinished penthouse on the 80th floor of the Tribeca Tower was a cavern of concrete, skeletal steel, and sharp shadows. It was the highest point in their new portfolio, a symbol of their enduring success, now stripped bare. The only window was a vast, floor-to-ceiling opening with no glass installed yet, offering a brutal, sweeping view of the city's glittering indifference. Mark Sullivan was already there, leaning against a stack of gypsum board, looking deceptively calm in a tailored cashmere coat. He didn't offer a handshake or an apology. He simply watched Ethan approach, the city lights reflecting coldly in his eyes. "I knew you wouldn't send lawyers, Ethan," Mark said, his voice flat, echoing slightly in the vast space. "You always preferred the drama of a personal confrontation, the auteur facing his villain." Ethan didn't respond to the bait. He walked to the edge of the open window, the wind whipping his expensive suit. He held up his phone, displaying the private message that detailed the Reddit seeding plan, the true financial documents, and the 1998 annex blueprints of the shipyard project. "I have the ledger, Mark, the real one. The one that proves you didn't save Olivia. You engineered the crisis, then orchestrated the cover-up to secure control over my daughter and financial leverage over the firm," Ethan stated, his voice a low rumble. "And I have the evidence that proves the Broken Vows NYC narrative was your idea. Why? Why the decades of feigned friendship just to tear down everything with a spectacular, public lie dressed as a private wedding?" Mark stepped away from the shadows, his composure finally cracking into a grim smile, a smile of victory and deep, ancient pain. "It was never about the money, Ethan. The money was just scaffolding. It was about the design. It was always about the design." He walked towards Ethan, stopping just short of the drop. "You remember 1998, don't you? The shipyard. I gave you the most innovative structural plan of our careers. It was raw, it was bold, it was mine. You said it was too risky, too raw for the clients. You shelved my vision, refined it with your own aesthetic flourishes, and then took the credit, the awards, the interviews, the glory. Mark gestured dramatically toward the sweeping skyline. You built a life on stolen credit, Ethan. You built a facade, not a home. You always chased the superficial applause. I became the financial analyst, the quiet partner, the one cleaning up your creative messes, while you stood on stages accepting trophies for my work.
The years of repressed resentment erupted. I watched you treat Olivia the same way, as a perfect final architectural achievement. You funded her life, her vanity, her fake wedding. You believed your money could buy her happiness and insulate you from all accountability. The wedding wasn't just a lie to get money. It was a mirror I forced you to look into, reflecting the fundamental dishonesty of your perfect life. The confession was a brutal psychoanalysis. Ethan stood silent, recognizing the chilling truth that underlay the venom. He had eclipsed Mark, not always intentionally, but certainly carelessly, basking in the spotlight and dismissing Mark's contributions as mere technical details. And Olivia? Ethan finally managed, the questions scraping his throat. Was she just collateral damage in your war against my ego? Mark hesitated, his eyes betraying a sliver of genuine guilt. She was desperate. She was weak. I didn't create the debt, Ethan. I just exploited the structural flaw you left in her character. I showed her how to survive in this city, by playing the game, by being ruthless. She was willing to do anything to avoid disappointing the great Ethan Miller. It made her pliable. A sudden, sharp movement. Mark reached into his coat pocket. Ethan flinched, bracing for a physical attack. Mark pulled out a small, metallic flash drive. This, Mark said, his voice calmer now, the fury subsiding into calculated resolve, contains every detail. The original Reddit logs, the financial paper trail, and an irrefutable breakdown of the wedding scam, all linked back to me. If you expose me for embezzlement and fraud, you also expose your daughter for complicity, destroying the Miller name in your firm in the process. You get the vengeance you crave, but you lose everything you value. Mark tossed the drive to Ethan, who caught it instinctively. The choice is yours, Ethan. The truth or the illusion of the perfect family? Which foundation will you choose to tear down? With that, Mark turned and walked away, leaving Ethan alone on the cold, exposed pinnacle, holding the key to his family's total annihilation.
Ethan did not pursue Mark. He left the cold shell of the Tribeca penthouse with the flash drive clenched in his fist, the symbol of his complete undoing. Vengeance felt suddenly trivial, a childish impulse compared to the vast, crushing weight of reality. The betrayal had not only ended a friendship and a partnership, it had evaporated the fundamental belief in his own judgment, his own life's foundation. He drove aimlessly for hours, the skyscrapers blurring into monuments of deception. He saw his legacy, Miller and Sullivan, not as a beacon of architectural excellence, but as a structure built on a profound lie, a lie that Mark had meticulously exposed. The thought of walking back into that glass office, of sitting across the table from the remaining partners, felt unbearable. He was the great architect who couldn't see the fatal flaw in the bearing wall of his own family. When he finally returned home, the apartment was silent. Olivia was gone. Having kept her word, the annulment papers were lying on the kitchen counter next to a short, hastily scrawled note. Dad, I reversed it all. Adam signed. The money is legally back where it belongs. I am trying to fix the financial damage, but I can't fix this. I am leaving the city. I need to figure out who I am when I'm not just your daughter or Mark's project. I hope you can forgive me someday, but I need to start by forgiving myself for being so weak. Olivia. The note was a quiet, desperate admission of responsibility, but it did little to alleviate Ethan's pain. He realized that Mark's manipulation had stripped Olivia of her identity, using her vulnerability, her fear of disappointing him as a tool. She was a victim, yes, but a compliant, complicit one. He felt a profound loss, not of a child, but of an idealized version of her that never existed. The subsequent days were a blur of professional withdrawal. Ethan didn't go to work. He delegated everything to the firm's chief counsel. He instructed them to quietly purchase Mark's share of the partnership at a fair market price, citing irreconcilable differences and personal fatigue after his wife's death. The partners, accustomed to Ethan's occasional dramatic retreats, accepted the explanation without probing. Mark, having achieved his psychological victory, accepted the financial settlement instantly, disappearing from the firm without a word. Ethan was effectively erasing Mark's physical presence, but the emotional scars remained. He spent his days in his study, staring at the flash drive. The agonizing choice was still before him: reveal the contents, send Mark to prison, and trigger a media scandal that would destroy Olivia's life forever and tarnish his own reputation beyond repair, or bury the truth and let Mark walk free with a substantial payout, preserving the facade of family integrity.
The pressure weighed on him. Society demanded justice, demanded the spectacular exposure of Mark's villainy. His sense of ethical duty demanded he expose the fraud. But his deepest, most primal paternal instinct, even after the betrayal, demanded protection for Olivia. The sight of the annulment papers, the evidence that she had, in her own broken way, tried to clean up her mess, was the deciding factor. He chose silence. Not forgiveness for Mark, but a cold, clinical decision to stop the damage. Mark had wanted public exposure. Ethan refused to give him the satisfaction of the fireworks. In the solitude of his opulent prison, Ethan finally understood the message buried in Mark's 25-year-old resentment. His life had been about creating dazzling facades, prioritizing the beautiful look of success over the strength of the underlying structure. His marriage, his friendship, his relationship with Olivia, they had all been structurally unsound, waiting for the right seismic event to bring them down. The special people narrative was his greatest deception, and he was the one who paid the highest price. The pain of betrayal was sharpest now, settling into a dull, permanent ache. He hadn't just lost a friend and gained a prodigal daughter. He had lost the belief in his own crafted reality. He realized the only way to genuinely rebuild was to tear down the entire structure of his current life. 6 weeks later, the Miller penthouse stood empty. Its exquisite furnishings shrouded in white dust sheets, resembling ghosts of a life once lived. Ethan had executed the ultimate architectural undoing, dismantling the life he had so meticulously designed. He had quietly sold his stake in Miller & Sullivan back to the partnership, taking a substantial but fair exit package. He ignored the partners' confusion, simply reiterating his need for a complete break after years of pressure and personal loss. He never used the flash drive. Late one night, standing at the edge of his now empty living room, he performed his final act of closure. He connected the drive to a device, initiated a multi-pass military-grade eraser program, and watched the digital evidence, the final, damning proof of Mark's malice and Olivia's weakness, vanish into non-existence. He chose to let the lie die with the silence, refusing to let Mark's vengeance or the need for his own public vindication destroy his daughter completely. Ethan left Manhattan for the Pacific Northwest, purchasing a small, unassuming property overlooking the rugged coastline. It was the antithesis of his New York life. No glass walls, no opulence, just wood, stone, and the ceaseless, honest roar of the ocean. He brought with him only a few boxes of personal mementos and the 1998 conceptual blueprints that Mark had signed. He framed Mark's original design, the one he had rejected, and hung it above his simple wooden desk. It was not a tribute, but a constant, stark reminder of his own past failure in judgment and trust.
He saw the silence as a form of painful, necessary penance. He had abandoned the notion of seeking forgiveness from Olivia for his own blindness, and he certainly offered none to Mark. He accepted the loneliness that came with knowing the truth. He recognized that the greatest injury of the betrayal was not the financial loss, but the realization that his deep, unconditional love for his daughter had been treated as a resource to be exploited, and his friendship with Mark an obstacle to be dismantled. The final scene finds Ethan on his porch on a cold, overcast morning, sipping coffee. He opens a magazine left by the previous owner. There, nestled between articles on hedge funds and real estate, is a short piece on the spectacular rise of a financial consulting firm, Solstice Consulting, now headed by Mark Sullivan. Mark's picture is smiling, professional, utterly ruthless. Ethan feels a familiar pang, but it is duller now, less consuming. Mark had his financial victory. Ethan had his peace. He had not found the fairy tale resolution of forgiveness and family reunion. He had found something harder, but more authentic: self-acceptance and the solitude of truth. He had learned that a man's true foundation is not the spectacular facade he presents to the world, nor the wealth he accrues, but the quiet integrity he maintains when everyone is gone and the spotlight has faded. Ethan Miller, the great architect, had finally learned how to build a simple, honest life far away from the special people who had nearly destroyed him.